And like you said, adding,
Yeah,
I thought he
that's
said
1%.
600 or so. Yeah, exactly. It's not much at all. Like this is not going to fix the housing crisis at all. And another point.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Refined Real Estate Podcast. My name's Ian. I'm here with Janelle and Manny. We are all local Halifax real estate investors. Combined, we've bought over 40 units. We've flipped houses, wholesale, and much, much, much more. So before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star review. Like and share with your friends, as we are just trying to continue to build this community, and we hope to have some good insights for you guys. So what we're going to start doing in our podcast episodes is giving you guys a quick tip of the week. And for this week, it's actually quite applicable with what we're going to be chatting about later. And that is that real estate is actually just a big game, as with many businesses out there. But the best way to play the game is to know what the rules are. So whether that's in terms of the strategies for buying homes and getting good values on them, or buildings, or whatever it might be, or in the case of today's podcast, it's actually how to operate within the rules based on what the city's allowing you to do in terms of permits and all that stuff. So without further ado, getting into our topic today is talking about short-term rentals and the new proposed bylaws. So last night I had the opportunity to go in person to the town council meeting, where they have a proposal put forth on what they hope to change with the short-term rental market, specifically in Halifax. It was my first time going to a town council meeting, so it was actually quite interesting seeing all the different players there, and not just sort of watching a video of it, but actually feeling what the energy was like in the room. And I can tell you it was all over the place. So there was a lot of people that were very much for the proposed bylaw changes, and a lot of people that were for, hey, let's definitely keep the Airbnb side of things going. So
Yeah, and Ian was fortunate enough to go in person, and I know myself, I was watching, I did watch the webinar online. I think Manny, you were listening in as well last night.
Yep, I was.
Yeah, definitely would like to hear what your guys' thoughts are. Again, being there in person was one thing, but yeah, seeing what it was like, it's just the same information getting out there. So yeah, would love to hear. Manny, what did you think about it?
Janelle, do you wanted to say something?
Yeah,
quickly?
I was just gonna say that was actually my first time listening to any sort of like town council meeting of any kind. So I think that like officially marks being an adult, maybe. Paying attention to politics. I actually voted, I think, last year for the first time. Shame on me. But yeah, so I tuned in from Argentina. Woohoo! And so I was listening to that last evening, and that was honestly pretty interesting. I think the part that I watched the most was when I think people who were I guess not for the proposed changes, that they were reading like their letters to council. So I listened to that, and there was some really strong, really well conveyed points, like really well discussed. I think like pretty unbiased, I would say. And then there were some not so good ones, a little bit more on the emotional side. But I thought it was really good. I don't know. What about you, Manny? What do you think?
I was actually not listening until Ian said in our group chat, "This is not going so well." So I'm like, okay, I need to tune into this. And right when I started watching, it was just the people talking to the people about just their own personal opinions on it. And I'm sure we'll get into like the whole idea of what they're trying to create with the new Airbnb bylaws, whether we agree or disagree. But me personally, I was telling my wife this, when they're up there just telling like their own personal stories, their anecdotal things, it doesn't really move me that much, whether they're saying something I agree with, like, or disagree with, the anecdotal stuff, I don't really care for that much. It's the people that come up there with facts, and numbers.
Manny's about the facts. He's like, give me the facts, give me the numbers. Yeah. I don't want anything else. I know exactly who you're going to talk about that had some really good points.
Yes, one particular guy. I'm sure we all heard him, and he was by far my favorite one. But
I'll have to give him a shout out. I don't know if anyone remembers his name. That gentleman, man.
Which one are we talking about? The Discover Halifax or about the guys
No,
that
the
operate?
guy that said like he went on AirDNA and he saw like how many
Oh
Airbnbs
yeah.
there are, and like if they all became long-term rentals, like it would really be just like it wouldn't really do much for like the big issue. But
Yeah.
anyways, I mention this because I don't think we should allow anecdotal evidence to affect policy on such a macro level here in the city. Like this is going to affect, thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not the entire province, right? So those decisions need to be based off of facts and numbers, in my personal opinion. And yeah, what about you guys? What about you, Janelle or Ian? Other you guys?
Yeah, I think for myself, I'm somewhat similar. I guess maybe I'm a little bit more biased to like the like experiences of the people on it, but still like very much facts based, true to being an engineer. But honestly, like just really having someone present the numbers, and I actually do want to go look into it a little bit more myself. But hearing the numbers of how many Airbnbs are in Halifax, and they're quoting around like 2,000, and then saying that I think a good chunk of them, if not over half, are just seasonally used. Like I know I've personally done that myself. I've done a furnished long-term rental for 8 months and then only Airbnb in the summer. But yeah, like hearing that, and they're talking about like the housing crisis and how many people need homes, and 10,000 more people coming to Nova Scotia every year. I think that should be fact checked as well. They could be on the money, but when you look at it from that perspective, it's like if you're putting 10,000 more units, or not, sorry, not 10,000, but 2,000 more units back online, like you're not making a huge dent. Like I'd be curious to look up the total number of rentals in Halifax.
I think the guy said it. I don't, again, I haven't checked to see how accurate he was, but he said it was some 55,000 rentals around that point. And like you said, adding,
Yeah,
I thought he
that's
said
1%.
600 or so. Yeah, exactly. It's not much at all. Like this is not going to fix the housing crisis at all. And another point, if people think this is going to help with affordable housing, it's not at all. Like you think these guys are going to now go list their current Airbnbs as long-term rentals at
I know
discounted
exactly what
rates?
they're gonna do. They're gonna do the same thing I did. They're gonna go list as a furnished rental, and do you charge less
Yes.
for a furnished rental? No. But the thing is, like, there's still a demand for it. Like, there's obviously still a demand for a furnished rental. Like, you can call it Airbnb, like that's like calling a tissue like a Kleenex box. But calling it, it's a furnished rental. That's what it is. Whether you're doing it for a couple of days or a couple of months, there's still a demand for it. I've got into it because I had people around me that were like looking for furnished rentals. Like there was none. So I mean, yeah, that's black and white. There's the demand for it.
Yep.
But yeah, what about you, Ian? What were your thoughts on it? You were there in person, so you kind of got more like
Yeah.
a feel of the room.
Yeah, so I would say from a people that were trying to push the proposal forward, and again, just to reiterate, the proposal is that Airbnbs be limited to your primary residence. So if you have like an ensuite or you're in a duplex or something to that regard, your personal residence, where you claim taxes, all that stuff, that's the only place where you could have an Airbnb. You can't have these places where you go, you buy it down the road and rent it out that way. That's kind of where things are going. Now, the people that were for that, the main two things that I kept seeing coming up was they felt that that was hurting the sense of community, and again, a lot of people came up with their anecdotal responses to, I used to have neighbors, now I don't anymore. So that was one of the big hitting topics that people came in, felt that they should be heard in that regard. And then the other being there's a housing crisis. People shouldn't be out there making money off of travelers, even though they're just because that there's this large housing crisis and stuff. But as we mentioned, like even if all of these were converted back, yeah, it's barely a drop in the bucket for what the over or the main issue is there. And that you heard some people even come forth and say that when they were like, yeah, this isn't going to fix it. How about we build more affordable units? And that was something that, it got some cheer, even though you're not allowed to clap. People were clapping for that type of stuff. But one thing that we'll get into some of the reasons why we think Airbnb is something that should be kept around. But one thing that was put forward that was actually starting to get a fair amount of traction was us as Airbnb owners, we would, and I put myself in this category, that we would pay an extra tax, and that tax go directly towards building affordable housing. And I was like, no brainer. Like if we could still operate our Airbnb businesses, and you throw on a percent tax. And I remember Mike Savage at the end, he was like, well, I can't believe that people are actually saying that they would pay a tax here, and that got a laugh there. But I think it's true that if you tacked on an additional fee for people running short-term rentals to help build more affordable housing, it would be a resounding yes. So,
And then
Manny.
it's just a matter of making sure that that tax actually ends up going towards affordable housing. That's a totally different topic here. So
yeah, let's not get into
people
that
think
side
that
of things.
people think, business owners, we are against taxes, but it's like if they're being used appropriately, 100%, this is, we want people to be housed. We don't want people to be living out on the streets.
yeah,
So
I think that's like kind of an important to look at this too. Again, like we're obviously all landlords here, so we're a bit on one side of the fence here, but just remembering that it's not like there's evil landlords out there who want people to be unhoused. Like we're all human. Like everyone wants everyone to have housing and shelter and a place to live. Like that's a desire by, I think, collectively everyone in Halifax, or most people in Halifax and in the world for that matter.
I think so. And like if we want to create more housing, besides just like having affordable housing, I don't know if you guys saw what Ontario just passed here. I don't know if it was the end of last year, but like pretty much every residential house can now be converted into a 3-unit building. I think Halifax, we have something similar. You can do like a secondary suite. But what Vancouver and BC are trying to do now is like you can turn every single residential lot into either a 4 or a 6-unit. Now, there's a lot to that, obviously. If you want to promote, like, or get builders to actually do that with incentives, now you're coming up with legit ways to fix this issue instead of these little things that they're doing with this Airbnb. I think they're just kind of, I don't know the right word for it, but it's not really moving the
Yeah,
needle. It's not doing
it's not.
anything.
It's definitely like a very like a flashy show to have, or like a flashy message to be sending. Like, oh yeah, we're putting restrictions on Airbnb just because it's such a hot topic talked about in the news. But like like you said, is it moving the needle based on the numbers? Not so much. And then also just to talk about the tax situation too. Like there's a lot of people spoke last night. It's like, where do they fall in that? When, they're Airbnb a couple months of the year, but then they stop, like they have like family that comes to visit or whatever it is. And it's like, well, do you continuously like put someone in that commercial tax bracket and then residential if they're doing a partial Airbnb and then they're doing long term? Yeah, like I don't know, what do you guys think about that?
I do think that there should be something there, like tax them appropriately. If hotels and those types of industries, they get taxed at a different rate, I can understand why Airbnbs should as well. But I feel like there's also experts or people that their full-time job is to figure this exact issue out, and they should work on that. It shouldn't be on the onus of us to kind of figure out how we should be taxed. If that's the reason to completely ban all Airbnbs, it's pretty foolish. So just figure out an appropriate tax strategy and implement it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then I guess, yeah, following up. So that was sort of the outreach from the people that were for moving forward with the new regulations and everything. Now, a lot of people there, again, were pro Airbnb, and definitely a handful of them stood out. Again, we got a lot of that anecdotal, I'm a single mother, and this is how I top up my expenses, offset some inflation, just running one or two, stuff like that. But we also had the privilege of listening to, it was Ross Jefferson, I believe his name was, and he's actually the CEO of Discover Halifax, and hearing some of the reports that they had put together, basically looking at the number of Airbnb guests that come to the province and how much spending they do in the local economy. And he gave a range of how much that was, but around the middle, it ended up being about 50 million in local spending. So that's not a number to just scoff at. That's and you could think about it. And then, that conversation, that figure kept getting thrown around, and then other people came forward saying, like, often my guests are looking for recommendations, and they're sending them to these nice little local restaurants that rely on our type of business. And especially coming off a pandemic when things were so shut down and times were tough, I don't think the appropriate thing to do now is to just try and slow down any sort of tourism when this is just the way to do it. And then further to that is that, based on the demand that we've seen for short-term rentals in Halifax, like, the hotels that we have certainly couldn't house everyone. And
Yeah.
if we're going
I know myself, like, as like a frequent like Airbnb like hotel guest, it serves its purpose. Not to like harp on this, but like the market demands it, people want it, they want to pay for it. Like, hotels are not offering all of the services that people want and that they get with Airbnb, especially like, I know I've gone to like bachelorette parties, and there's like 6, 7 of us girls, like, we're not going to stay in a hotel room. Like this is more of an argument for like why Airbnb is good, but again, it's kind of tied into this where they want to restrict it. There's places where people want it, and the hotels are just not serving that purpose. So I hope that they're appreciating that and taking that into consideration.
Yeah,
I hope they
absolutely.
are. Because like when I was just on vacation, we were at an Airbnb for 8 of the 10 days, and we did that purposely so we could have our own kitchen, so we can, you know, make our own meals. If you have to take out every single meal 3 times a day for an entire vacation, it's
Huge.
tough. It's costly.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's
And
how
then
I think us and most people would travel, is like, if I were going to Ontario for the weekend, or BC, or whatever it is, I'm first looking for an Airbnb, because you're not just stuck in a hotel. You get more of an experience, and you can only imagine that people want to do the same thing when they come here.
And then to add on to that, I know there's a lot of discussion about the economic impact of it. And again, like, we're in Nova Scotia. I'm from Cape Breton. Cape Breton, I think tourism is one of the largest, one of the largest sources of like income or GDP for the area. Did not take economics in school at all, but yeah, it's a huge impact. And not only that, but they're talking about, it was Avery of Airbnb 365. Shout out to them. I know they're doing a ton of work out there, and they're employing, they said, around like 50 people. And then on top of like that example, and then everyone else who's hiring cleaners. I've been there. I've tried to hire cleaners. Let me tell you, like, those cleaners are busy. And they're not cheap either. So they're making quite a bit of money. Like, good for them, like, as they should be. It's tough work. I think we've all stayed in Airbnbs and seen what happens, but yeah, like, it's not something to like wash under the rug. Like, it's a pretty impactful amount.
Yeah, and on that note, another point just to that same effect was looking at what the wage for a hotel cleaner is right now. It's about $16 an hour. And I know my
Oh, I tell
Airbnb
you,
cleaners.
I've paid my cleaners way more than that.
Oh yeah, and happy to do so. And that's the thing. Like, that's the trickle
Yeah.
down economics of the situation that we're looking at. It's not just, oh, like, there's some greedy landlords out there that are making an extra buck, but it's like, no, we're literally stimulating, the economy in maybe smaller parts of it, but it's still, we have like my cleaner. I know she sometimes will bring her kid to come help clean, that type of stuff. And it's like, it's putting more money
That's not happening at hotels.
into the pockets. No, in hotels. And then the other point was that every single hotel in downtown Halifax is owned by an American company. So instead of flooding the hotels with all that business, where all that money is, all the profits are just getting shipped down south of the border, whereas if we can keep the Airbnbs, that's money that's kept in Nova Scotia. So
Yeah. So needless to say, if the motion passed, a lot of small businesses, locally owned businesses will be shut down. A lot of these cleaners that you said will have to now go work for potentially a minimum wage job. And not to mention the $50 million that Nova Scotia would be losing annually. This is a significant event that would be transpiring. All for what? For what they want. Again, I think our friend Cam, he mentioned it when he had a chance to speak last night. It's like, what is the purpose of all of this? It doesn't really make sense. If it made sense, like if the benefit of what they're trying to pass was worth, the struggle of all that it could cause, okay, I can understand. But it doesn't equate. It doesn't even out at all.
Yeah, like
yep.
here's a question, because I personally don't have any Airbnbs operating in Halifax right now. But
Neither do
have
I.
they talked about? Okay, yeah, I guess
three.
you and Russ do right now. Ian, I guess
I
you
have
might have some
three
right now,
right
maybe
now.
not.
Well, yeah, most of them are long term right now. Like again, housing nurses, housing
There you
families
go. Like
visiting
how
from.
long are your guests staying for right now?
So I do kind of the model that most, or that you were doing as well. It's like through the winter months, let's move to month, and then in the summertime when there's peak tourism, all that stuff, then I'll do minimum 3 night stays. But right now it's all month to month, and yeah, and it's been great. So
Yeah, I'd be curious to see if there's any or hear if there's any discussion about, like, we're all small in this. Like you said, you have three. Like had one in Halifax, but I'm curious about the people who do have the 17, 18, 19 Airbnbs. I'm curious about like what their market share of that is. Because like I can, like, again, kind of playing both sides here, I can see the argument for, if you have 20 Airbnbs in Halifax, and yeah, it does make an impact on housing. Like that's 2 bedrooms each, that's 40 to 60 people. So yeah, like again, like just appreciating the argument for the regulations. I'm curious if they've talked about, like, if you're kind of small time Airbnb, or if you really operating, I would call that a commercial, like that's a business, like you're busy if you're doing that.
yeah. Or doing like arbitrage on a larger scale. And for
Yeah.
anyone not familiar, it's when if you go out and you rent a property, and then you are the person that's actually Airbnb-ing that. You don't own the property, but you manage the Airbnb side of things. So it's like things like that, okay, maybe we should consider, either slowing down or just making sure that those are the ones that aren't, taking up other people's homes, or whatever it might be. But it's like, especially for the people that are just doing it on a smaller scale for a little bit of extra income, it's like to put the brakes on there, I just don't see the benefit.
This would kill the arbitrage model here in Nova Scotia. I don't know if anybody does it at scale here, but if they do, this would be detrimental to their business.
I
Yeah, I
think
would
some
shut it
people are. I
down.
think I know of one individual. Yeah. That's their business gone.
Gone.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
So
Brutal. I don't know. I mean, Nova Scotia and Canada, it's tough to be an entrepreneur. I've heard a lot of discussions about people talking about going to the States, and they're like, different ball game, different landscape. It's
us
it
included.
encouraged. It is. It's frustrating.
That's exactly why, like me and Ian and yourself, that's why we're all like shifted. It's just tough. They make it unnecessarily tough here, and I don't think it's just Nova Scotia. I find it's Canada as a whole. From maybe there might be some provinces that are a little better than the rest, but it's just it's a very odd environment that they're just so against entrepreneurship. Sometimes it seems.
Absolutely. But yeah, I would also
Yeah,
like to
I
get
don't
your
know. I
thoughts.
don't want this to get to be like too ranty.
No, exactly. That's why
Like, this
we'll
sucks,
move
this
it.
sucks, this sucks. I'm like,
We'll move.
so this is what you can do better. This is what you can do now.
Yeah. So I guess to start wrapping things up, one big proposal that I foresee going through, but would like to get your guys' thoughts on, is like a short-term rental registry, and what your guys' thoughts are on that. So Manny, what do you think?
I don't think it would be a terrible idea if especially if now they can kind of track them and then, like I said earlier, tax them appropriately. If that's the means to it, then sure, I don't see anything wrong. If that's really the sole reason for it, if there's some insidious reason that I'm not sure what there could be, then we can revisit it. But if it's just solely to figure out how to tax them at a reasonable rate, then yeah, I don't see anything wrong with it.
Yeah, what
Yeah,
about you,
I'm
Janelle?
pretty much same as you. I'm like, what's the purpose? Like, what's the end goal here? Is it just to have a political play and be like, hey, look, like we have registry? But yeah, is it like what's going to improve because of this? Is it going to improve taxes? Is it going to improve like information on it? I know there's a lot of information already on Airbnb that's tracked pretty heavily. But yeah, but to answer your question, like if there's a good reason for it, for sure. Yeah, no problem. No problem at all.
Yeah. And that's exactly where I sit with it. But yeah, so then I would also just want to wrap up with sort of some of the remarks that were coming out from some of the counselors in the meeting when things were wrapping up. And a lot of them were left saying that we really don't have enough information here, that a lot of this is speculation. They have the report that's been 2 years in the making, but they don't have all the data across the board. And I think that's going to be a reason to implement a registry where they can actually now collect a lot more data and make more informed decisions. Whereas, again, it's just sort of speculation right now. They don't know if how many of on Air DNA, that's what they were referencing a lot of the night, is that actually giving them the proper information? Are these Airbnbs operating year round, or are they just in the summer? They just don't know. And then I don't think they factored in, again, like the whole tourism side of things. Like, it's like, how can you just think, okay, let's cut out, I don't know how many hotel rooms there are and how many hotel rooms there are in comparison to Airbnbs, but it's like, I know people that in the past have had trouble getting to Halifax, like in the past year, that have had trouble finding places. And it's like, if you want to cut out so much more of those available places for tourists to come, it's like, what do you think's going to happen? We're going to lose money in tourism. So, but yeah, just to hear their thoughts, that was a big part of it, that they didn't feel like they had all the information. So I don't foresee this whole thing getting passed. I think what we'll see next is a registry, and then from that, after maybe a year, maybe 6 months of them actually be able to collect more data, then we might see some more changes. But I want to say that like, I couldn't see them just completely shutting down the Airbnb side of things. Yeah, I think that would be
So just to,
very
to recap,
tricky.
last night was strictly a public hearing. There was no regulations, or they had the proposed regulation that they don't want Airbnbs in residential zones. That's not the property that you live in. Like, that's what they're proposing, and that's what the public hearing was for, just to make sure like I
That's
have all my
that
facts
is
straight here.
correct. Yep.
Okay, yeah. But nothing changed as of last night.
And I was just going to say, and I don't foresee anything changing dramatically one way or another here soon. So
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think they realize this is a big decision and this would affect many people. And there's a lot of economic like value here. So like, if they don't make the right call, it could cause some problems. So I do hope they take their time to make, a wise and the best decision. Not even like, not for us as operators, but just for the province as a whole, and really look at it from a big picture.
agreed.
And just on that too, I know we talked a lot about like our feelings on it and our experiences on it, but to talk about like future action, like what can be done. I know that I think it's IPONS is an association for real arts in Halifax in Nova Scotia. We actually took part in a webinar today. I think Ian and I listening in on that. There was a Q&A period and a bit of a sort of kind of discussion, more so on the landlord, like typical long-term rentals. But yeah, I think going to these things, like if you're a landlord or a tenant, both, or an Airbnb guest or host or whatever it is, I think taking part in these is crucial. 'Cause it's one thing to talk about it and vent about it, but it's another thing to get out there, and like kudos to everyone who wrote a letter and did the research, who spoke about it, presented a lot of really great facts. That's fantastic. And I think if we see a lot more of that, then we can at least showcase or like really present both sides fairly. Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway here, is just make sure you're taking action and taking part in the very least.
No, absolutely. Anything else from you guys?
No, I think we touched on everything pretty much of the hearing.
Yeah. Well, perfect.
Yes,
Well,
I think
we
that was just
will.
a good recap about like what, yeah, like just what's going on in the Halifax, Nova Scotia market. And like Ian said, you at the start of this, like the quick tip, knowing the rules of the game is so important, because then you can't make strategic decisions. You can't understand like what is the best strategy for you.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, all right, everyone. Well, thank you very much for listening. If you know anyone that is running an Airbnb or is thinking about running an Airbnb, please share this episode with them. We're always available to chat as well. And then, we're always looking for feedback from you guys. You can just message us on our Instagram. We're looking to bring in some new segments. It's going to be Ian's Insights, Manny's Moment, and we're still looking for a clever name for Janelle's segment. So if anyone has any recommendations, please reach out. We would love to hear. And again, we're always keen to chat all things real estate. So please reach out to us. We would love to chat. And again, please like and subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. It helps us with the algorithm side of things, so we can get our message out to that many more people, continue to grow the community that we're trying to build, and then just keep growing together and as individuals. So thank you very much for listening. We will be back same time next week.